Hello, you wonderful people. So 2 days ago, I ended up doing this video where I kind of talked about, well, zombies in general, particularly like TV shows and stuff like that, like the different versions of zombies and stuff like that. And a question I kind of threw out there, like, because I was actually like, something I wasn't sure about is like the whole zombies eating brain conversation, like where that started from, because like nowadays it seems like more often than not zombies eat flesh. Obviously, like zombie kind of brought back the whole like eating brain situation, but I said I was going to look into it, and I looked into it a little bit. There's one particular article that I read that was quite fascinating, because a lot of stuff basically is like, oh yeah, this all stems from Romero's like Night of the Living Dead, you know, is like that, like, you know, but prior to that, zombies were kind of already like, you know, part of like pop culture, but it wasn't until that movie. In actuality, it's not until like Return of the Living Dead, or is it Return of the Dead? Either way, which is kind of its own thing. Like I say, I highly recommend you read the article, because that was like actually like, that wasn't actually done by Romero. He had no input on that. That was actually the person he wrote the original movie with or whatever. They split up, had different rights to the whole thing. Like I said, I highly recommend you read into it yourself. I'll include the article in the description down below. But essentially, like, he's like, anytime people bring that up, he's like, what are you talking about? Like, he's like, oh, okay, but like, never once in any of the movies I've ever done did I ever have any of my quote unquote zombies actually go for anyone's brains. They've always just been for tearing people's flesh apart, like most, you know, zombie stuff typically kind of aims for nowadays anyway. But it's like, it still didn't correlate in my head, because and that's another thing too, like I talked about like ripping flesh, like them zombies tearing people's flesh apart and stuff like that as a more recent thing. It's like, no, apparently that's always been a thing in the past, but it's just like, I guess for some reason it just didn't correlate. And it's kind of something kind of along those lines of like, I think it's because in actuality, like, I don't actually remember watching a lot of older zombie movies. Even like the Romero movies, I'm slightly familiar with them, but I don't think I've ever sat down and watched any of them all the way through. Even like the Dawn of the Dead remake, I don't even think that is something that I have ever sat all the way through. And I think that's kind of one of the reasons why, like, I'm not one of those people that ever got burnt down on zombies, because I never like dived too deeply into it. But nevertheless, even he's like, I don't know where people attribute that to me. The article in particular I was reading was kind of like, the ones that might have like set that all up are the Simpsons, maybe, because they did a whole, like, they said a spoof of Night of the Living Dead. I don't know whether they were referencing that, like, whether it was one of the particular like treehouse horrors they do. I feel like if it was a treehouse horror, they would have specifically referenced that, but maybe it was just a random like spooky episode or something. Nevertheless, they're like one of the earliest versions. I think it was like in a 1992 episode or something like that, that kind of depicted like zombies eating brains. So like they perpetuated it, like, but like from what I was reading, it's like no one knows exactly where that came from, you know. So it's just it's so fascinating that like something that's attributed to one person is like, I actually never fed into that at all. And an interesting thing along those same lines is, I said earlier when I was like, oh, Romero's like quote unquote zombies, because initially he had originally called them ghouls, but it wasn't until like Return of the Dead or Living Dead, like I said, whichever one it was, the one that he had no input on, that's when zombie was actually used. But he always referred to them as ghouls in the original movie. The word zombie wasn't actually in the Night of the Living Dead movies. I thought that was just kind of like a fascinating thing all in itself. Like I said, I am not doing this whole thing justice. I highly recommend you read the article. It does a lot more like breakdown of things, and I will also include another article I came across that kind of explains where zombieism came from originally, like the term and like the history of it. And it's vastly different from what you think of it as. You think it kind of started somewhere like at least related to what zombies are. It kind of correlates, but it's a very different thing. The article I kind of was reading in particular was kind of comparing and contrasting zombie, the history behind the word zombie, as well as where it is now, kind of where it is in pop culture and everything. It's kind of like a love-hate thing, where it's like, it's kind of sad, you know, that people kind of forget the history behind zombie, because when they look at zombie, they look at the more modern takes of it and stuff like that. The more they kind of quote unquote call it kind of escapism. I kind of don't like the way the article went about it, because it's almost demonizing the way zombie like kind of is now, which is like, to be fair, that's that person's opinion. And I think it's interesting to know the history. It is quite depressing, I will note that before you decide to go diving too deeply into it. Like I said, this is just one particular article like I came across. I'm sure there's others that kind of allude to it and everything and talk heavily about it. But if you are very interested in your just history or just learning about zombies in general, like where that term came from and what its original meaning was, like in history, because it's actually tied to Haitian folklore. then I highly recommend you check it out. But don't expect anything like, I'm like, oh, it's something quirky and weird happening. It's like, no, it's actually quite sad where the term zombie comes from. So I mean, really, that was all the purpose of this video, because I just wanted to know, like, you know, I might do further updates upon anything else that I end up finding out about this, but currently it's like no one really knows. It was just kind of something that was kind of thrown out there to be like, oh yeah, this is why zombies eat brains. Another thing, and it's nothing official, it's just one of those things where I've seen it kind of tossed around in the internet, like different forums I was reading. One thing was kind of tossed that, you know, because of like that sensation of kind of being dead, or like, look, I'm going to butcher this while I'm paraphrasing it, so I do apologize, but essentially it's like zombies want brains because of the serotonin levels in a brain. It makes them feel something, and I guess arguably you could say that's kind of like what Warm Bodies, the movie, did, as well as iZombie kind of tap into that, like, you know, what brains do to zombies in those respective media. Like in Warm Bodies, it kind of, eating brains basically made them more human, and on iZombie, you know, it has its benefits of like, oh, you adopt that person's personality and stuff like that, which obviously the show's introduced a way to kind of get around that. You also maintain some of their memories and stuff like that, so there's that whole like avenue of things. I guess like ultimately it's supposed to be like zombies trying to get back something, like their soulless flesh devouring things, and maybe eating brains in some shape or form is some innate need to be who they were, or something like that. I guess, like I said, this is just like random stuff I was reading on forums and stuff like that, so another thing you can kind of add to your Googling list or whatever. So, but really, that's all I want to talk about in this video. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and good